Struggling with scanning errors and peeling labels? Moving or reconfiguring your warehouse? Implementing a new WMS? The wrong labels can slow your operation down. Luckily, ID Label has durable, scannable barcode labels and signs built to last and keep your operation moving. Plus, if you need to get those labels installed, they've got it covered. Their expert team installs rack labels, overhead signs, floor striping, and more with precision, so your warehouse operations continue uninterrupted. I've installed tens of thousands of labels in my career, and I wish I had someone else do it for me. Get a free sample pack at idlabelinc.com, because when they do the barcodes, you can do more. That's idlabelinc.com for a free sample pack and more information.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast here at ProMat 2025, and I have two guests joining me today. One guest that has been on previously back in December 2019.
Episode 145.
Episode 145. That's a long time ago, definitely. Yeah. So it's Nate and Jess Schisler. So it's great to have you here. Great to have you joining us. You guys are representing your own company, right? MFR and also Maven Circular. Yeah. So tell us first. Tell us a little bit about your days here and what you're experiencing on the show floor here.
Yeah, ProMat's a great event for us. I was kind of joking with Jess when we first got here, as really small independent warehouse operators, we tended to stick to the perimeter of each of the exhibit halls.
Okay, yeah.
I used to work with the Dymatics and, those guys, but we don't play in that space anymore. So it's really great to see, a lot of the innovation of those smaller companies that are building, boutique products for the warehousing and supply chain market. Definitely. And, definitely get a lot of ideas, inspiration. Neat to see kind of those specialty use cases and problems that are being solved by some of those companies that are exhibiting on the perimeter of the show. Yeah. Obviously, can stand all day and watch, the ASRS demo take place, but we're not going to be putting one of those in anytime soon.
Sure.
So, we come here to really just find solutions that we can offer to our customers.
Yeah, I think that's great too, because there is it's easy to get kind of mesmerized and lost by all that stuff, right? But there are these in-between solutions that are doing some really creative things and addressing some really practical needs. Sure. Definitely, yeah. And what about you, Jess? Have you seen anything stands out?
Yeah, walking around with Nate, and his background is more warehousing, so he knows all the brands and all the larger companies, and I'm looking at things from a bit of a different lens and really looking at, the how to solve XYZ problems. And a lot of what we're seeing here, of course, we went last year, we were in Atlanta
at Modex.
It was very eye-opening for me, and then this year around I kind of knew what we were getting into. I definitely hit my 10,000 step steps for the day pretty early in the day, but it is really great to chit chat with smaller companies that are really growing but hyper focused on what they're actually selling. And we have found a couple solutions that we've considered bringing into our warehouse, which is always a bonus and you're really trying to land when you're coming to an event like this. So meeting a lot of really cool people selling interesting things and solving some of our own problems in warehousing as well for some of our customers.
Nice. Solving your own problems, solving their problems.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
Just problem solvers all around.
That's what it is.
Very nice. So tell us a little bit about your business or your businesses. You got MFR, Maven Circular. I see you're all branded out here for the show. Love it, definitely. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so MFR launched in the fall of 2022 as a services business in support of some of our consulting clients. So We've got Maven Circular. It's a consulting practice focused on reverse logistics, returns, and kind of specialty supply chain. And then we kept getting requests and really demand for like helping brands and helping retailers find a service provider to support those specialty services. And we were leading a lot of RFPs and really kind of like coming to the end of that process, not really super excited with the candidates that had responded to the RFP. And one of our clients said, look, like, we know you guys know how to do this. Why don't you go lease a warehouse and become our operator? And that's literally how it started. Like, we were on a sales call with them, and we were driving back from Boston, and like it happened on a car ride. Go lease a warehouse and like take over our operations. And then since then, we've started just really expanding that services offering. It started as something that was just like gated by our consulting practice. You had to be a consulting client to really have access to those services. And now as we're expanding beyond just re-commerce and resale, we're really bringing that business that, while it sounds like it's very new, we've been at it for a while. We've got three locations in Central Ohio and about a dozen active customers. We're bringing that business kind of out into the forefront and talking a little more openly around our broadened service offering, focusing on kind of upstream and downstream from re-commerce and resale.
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's such an interesting market, right? And a position to be in within the supply chain. So I guess tell us, where are we at right now in regards to this whole returns, re-commerce, resales? I mean, what's really going on in the distribution ecosphere?
Yeah, I think when we were reviewing the show notes for today, re-commerce has definitely not lived up to the hype. Certainly over the last 2 years.
Yeah, there was certainly a big demand 4 or 5 years ago, and that was really driving in the industry. And in the past year and a half, 2 years, we've really seen it like almost stabilize, and not much growth in that area. So as business owners, that when you're looking at scaling and growing, we're like, how can we still support more customers, but in a direction that has, that we're solving more problems. So we know returns is certainly one of those huge items that is a problem for a lot of brands and a lot of retailers.
And when we look at the supply chain of, starting with re-commerce and resale as the service offering, and you think about what's the supply chain of a re-commerce item, the source of inventory for a re-commerce program is returns. And so, we started to ask these questions like, okay, if resale and re-commerce isn't really going to be the kind of darling industry trend that everyone thought it was, and we can talk about why that is, but look, it's like a lack of regulation. If you compare the US to Europe, very different regulatory systems. Brands are just not incentivized to run resale programs the way they are in other countries. And so that's a big piece of it. And also there's just a lot of like really entrenched ways of thinking about resale and off-price markets that are still very prevalent in the US. So we'll just park that. But when you think about the supply chain of resale or re-commerce or any circular product, the source of supply is returns. And so you start to ask these questions like, well, how can we prevent things from needing to go into a secondary market? And the answer in most cases is actually speed. And that's really like our thesis here, which is the reason a lot of products are ending up needing to go to an off-price channel is because they're not returned to stock fast enough to catch that full price, to really ride the coattails of that full price selling session or selling season for that particular product. If there's a 2 or 3 or 4 week delay, we're working with a couple brands out of Australia right now who, and you won't believe me when I tell you this, and I didn't believe it when I learned about it.
Let's hear it.
Almost all Australian e-commerce brands that are shipping into the US today are repatriating their returns back to Australia to be reprocessed, and put back into stock to then again be sold into the U.S.
That sounds like a lot of wasted time.
And money.
Yeah.
But to your point, time, like, what's another word for time? It's the cash cycle of your inventory.
Yeah, definitely.
How can you get that inventory back into stock faster and resell that returned item at full price? That's really the question that we're
and the
the
key
problem
there.
we're trying to solve.
The key there is how do you mitigate that markdown time?
Right.
So how are you avoiding that? If let's say typical brand is a markdown strategy of 16 weeks, you have to get that product back in full price to actually make it move.
Right.
Yeah.
And most warehouses, that's the returns area is definitely deprioritized from a labor planning perspective.
Right.
So you have your returns sitting at the dock for weeks potentially, and it just all ends up being on markdown. So why would you dedicate expedited labor to work in those spaces?
Yeah.
So that's. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, and so that's really our thesis of like evolving the service offering to say we've already figured out how to do the most complex stuff in the industry, which is inspections, refurbishment, all of the re-commerce type activities. So returns processing for us is actually the easiest thing we do. And fulfillment of those returned units is even easier than that. And so by looking at re-commerce as actually the need for re-commerce as a symptom as opposed to a solution, we're now saying, all right, let's help you get that returned inventory back into stock faster. For some customers, we're like 48 hours dock to stock. Return hits our dock and it's back in your sellable inventory within 48 hours. And then we're acting as a secondary fulfillment node for those brands. And we've assembled a tech stack. Like, this is not like homegrown tech. We've pieced together a tech stack of companies you've heard of. I know you've talked to like Kyle and Two Box's team. We work with them. We work with Ship Hero, and we put together a couple integrations that allow us for these brands that are on Shopify and Salesforce and other like leading platforms to basically like plug into our stack and just reroute returns to us, and then allow them to be refulfilled as a secondary node with no integration, no dev work on their team on behalf of their engineering team, and start to think about that returned inventory as like, how do we improve that cash cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's super smart, right? Because you think about it, and like you said, returns is often like deprioritized, right? In that sense. And I've managed a returns department myself in the past, and certainly when picking was busy, they certainly came for the returns workers first. And then I was still asked, like, why are the returns so old?
Yeah.
Well, that's another story. But I think that being able to do that and have that dedicated kind of resource to focus on that and turn it around in 48 hours, closes that gap like you were talking about, to be able to take advantage of that selling season, right? And I imagine you see that is a very prevalent problem within apparel, especially, right?
For
it's
sure.
Very seasonal.
Definitely, yeah.
Highly seasonal. We have a background. We both worked at Lululemon for a period of time. I would say they're kind of on the extreme end of like, there's not 4 seasons, there's 52 seasons, like every week is a new season.
Yeah.
Most brands don't go to that extent, but many brands today are operating on a 4 to 6 week cycle.
Right.
So those returns that you start to receive after the first or second week don't make it back in inventory to catch that full price selling window.
Yeah.
And so, another way to think about returns is like, if your brand has a 20% return rate, which is pretty average for the apparel space, that means at any given time, 20% of your inventory is unsellable.
Yeah.
Because it's in transit or unprocessed back to you.
Yeah.
So, if you were a brand and I'm pitching you, like, you tell me the dollar value of 20% of your inventory.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's millions of dollars for many brands.
Definitely.
And so getting it back selling as quickly as possible is actually far more beneficial than offering a circular experience. Like, let's just get it back into stock as fast as possible and let you resell it.
Yeah, and sell it like it's new, basically.
Exactly.
So now on that side for your business, right? So you're only focusing on processing the return and then fulfilling the returned items, right? Are you doing other fulfillment too, or are you just very concentrated on that?
Well, we're also doing grading. So within the process for inbound of said return, if there is a customer that is looking to pivot both returns and re-commerce, we have that capability. So we have the ability to say, this is B grade, that goes to re-commerce. This is A grade, that's full price return. That will just get refulfilled. So we have the capability of grading and navigating through different tiers that might be defined by the customer. And then we also have an exit strategy for a lot of brands. So like social selling is one that's like, I don't know if you've heard of the Whatnot, but that is definitely a huge, big industry that's growing. It's growing, and it's interesting because that's really focused on selling to resellers. So when you think about price point, there's that consideration.
Okay. Yeah, we're kind of like positioning it. Well, like TBD if we trademark this or not, but what we're calling it is essentially like direct-to-consumer liquidation. Okay. So as opposed to liquidating your unsellable product for 10 cents on the dollar and it changes hands 3 or 4 or 5 times between liquidation brokers, companies like Ghost and Helpsy and others that are operating in the background very quietly, like buying liquidations for pennies on the dollar and then reselling them into like regional markets and like consignment shops and stuff like that. Our strategy is like, how do we help the brand get that liquidated item either sold to the final customer, ideally, or sold to that consignment shop owner and skip all of the handoffs from broker to broker to broker. And so instead of getting 10 cents on the dollar, you're getting 30, 40, sometimes 50 cents on the dollar. Yeah. And we do that we're building out a social selling capability. So, I mean, literally imagine a Whatnot studio.
Yeah. Are we going to see you on
You're not going to see me. There's no...
we want to see Nate up there.
There's no on-air talent on the couch here. Okay. But, we have the space and are building out a studio to facilitate that. We also offer some really creative auction services. We're a licensed auction firm in the state of Ohio, which is like something I thought I would never have on my resume.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, and so we can offer some creative like liquidation options that still protect the brand. These transactions don't go up on the internet. They're not searchable. It's not like we're putting stuff on eBay, where you're essentially competing against yourself. We're able to sell directly to that like one level removed from the end customer and get the brand a lot better return on their liquidation.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds like you're able to kind of focus on it and still squeeze as much value out of that inventory as possible.
That's really the goal, both for us and for our customers, to really drive revenue for everybody all around. And instead of, at a core, we're still really against that, like, let's just exit product to landfill. That's incinerate. That's not who we are. That's not what we want. If a brand is very, coming in strong on that's how they want to exit, we're not going to say no, but we're probably actually not in the sales cycle going to be attracting those those brands anyways. Yeah. And really, when you think about re-commerce, a lot of it is to deter what's actually going to landfill to have a second or third life. And we still want to be driving that kind of outcome. And it's just, how do we do that in a scalable way?
Yeah, interesting. And now, what about from, because you kind of mentioned in the beginning of the conversation that e-commerce was a huge topic 5 years ago, last couple of years, maybe the conversation has died down a little bit, but what about from the consumer perspective? Like, what are you hearing that consumers are kind of demanding? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones really driving the supply chain in any shape or form, right? So what are they kind of looking for in terms of, returns or e-commerce or options around it?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Spoiler alert, your team hates manual unloading. And who can blame them? It's slow, risky, and exhausting. Tawi's container unloader eliminates the pain. Lifting loads safely and efficiently from inside containers. Engineered to lift heavy goods ergonomically from deep inside containers, it accelerates unloading while keeping your team safe from strain. Safer workers, faster turnaround, and better efficiency. Better for your people, better for your bottom line. Lift smarter. Visit Tawi.com today. That's TAWI.com.
Yeah, I think that generationally it's different. So younger generations are really driving re-commerce, buying secondhand, thrifting, those sort of behaviors. it's definitely more of a value for them.
Okay.
Where the older generations are, that's not really the direction that they're going. They're kind of more open to buying new and returning.
Mm-hmm.
So, e-com has really exploded from a returns perspective, probably right around when, COVID started.
Yeah.
Everyone was at home, bored. And I think that there's, the Amazon effect of like buying now, get everything as fast as you can, return it. And Amazon has like a Amazon warehouse, but they also sell their returns, right? And a traditional brand doesn't have necessarily that ability. So, it's unfortunate how much, from an e-com perspective, how much you're seeing from a returns perspective, but you're also getting that from a customer behavior. So there's almost, and in my opinion, and Nate might not actually feel the same way, but like I kind of feel like
let's see.
Like Amazon has really created this behavior, this normal behavior of buying a bunch of things, keeping one of them and sending everything back. And it's just so easy.
Yeah.
And when you have consumers doing that same behavior with a brand, but the brand doesn't have like the back end capability to make that sustainable in any way. Yeah. They're getting all these returns, but then that example like I was sharing, like it just sits at the dock for weeks and then it's not actually, they're not actually making much margin on it. So, sometimes they just consolidate it and ship it out to get incinerated. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate. And so we're seeing, as an industry, seeing that behavior. And, I'm even seeing it, in different circles of my life that, it's a topic that gets talked about. Like, if we just buy this, we'll just return it when we're done using it. Yeah. I think a lot of people do that. And I think Evan from 2 Boxes, he actually has a pretty funny, I think he does it weekly.
Yeah. Ship people return.
Yeah.
Of course.
That's,
he's got a brand there.
Yeah.
Trademark that. But yeah, it's definitely a reality. So I think as a blanket statement, I feel like consumers aren't all acting the same. I think there's differences in generations.
Yeah, interesting. So do you agree?
Yeah, I would say I agree with all of that. To answer your question very directly, there is undeniably unmet demand for off-price or if you just want to look like blanket statement, like off-price goods, whether that's sale, clearance, closeout, secondhand, resale in its various fashions, there's definitely unmet demand for sure across categories. You can look at certain like outlier brands and say like their customers really into this. Keen footwear being an example. Like the Keen customer, I've made the analogy like Keen is like the Patagonia of boots. They're like a feel-good, environmentally conscious brand. Their customers are very environmentally conscious. And so when they launched their program with essentially zero fanfare, they just put a link on their website. Like that program is wildly successful because their customers are craving it.
Right.
And you can look at viral brands like Yeti or Lululemon where there's such a strong demand for the product and people are paying such a premium for the name that there's clearly unmet demand there for off-price. Those brands tend to be a little bit cagier about like acknowledging and marketing the programs, but their programs are still massively successful. I mean, look, when Lululemon's like new program launched, zero marketing, zero public awareness. They put
word of mouth.
They put a link out there, and in the first 30 days did $1 million in revenue.
Oh, wow.
Without even acknowledging the existence of the program.
Yeah, without even really pushing it,
Yeah. So those certainly exist as like, I would say they're outliers to the broader like resale secondhand market. But we see very consistently that if you make a quality product and as a brand you embrace the life of that product beyond its first sale, there are customers who want to buy it in an off-price model, and they will continue to be loyal to you. And really more importantly, like the data that we see, obviously we have to be very careful here because I've signed so many NDAs over the last 5 years, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to talk about anymore, but like pretty reliably across our customer base, we see that if you are offering a resale program, for every 2 units that you sell in a secondhand model, you're acquiring 1 new customer.
I see.
Like that to me should be like, that's it, show's over, we're done. Like, you're telling me if I can sell 2 used things, I get a new full price customer who's going to transact on I can now market to at full price?
Yeah.
Like, what are we even talking about?
Right.
So there's definitely unmet demand out there.
Yeah.
Brands are just, at least in the U.S., are very cagey about these programs. They're still very uneasy about it.
I mean, we had an episode on our podcast, Circular Innovation, around like which brands are really best suited for a re-commerce program. And if you kind of, peel back the onion a little bit there, it's like, high quality, typically big margin.
Right.
Outdoor gear is like a great example.
Yep.
You use it a couple times, and then it sits in your garage for 20 years until your grandson's like, yeah, I need a tent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like that is an example that like a program for, Solomon or, Mountain Equipment Co-op or REI, like those are definitely areas that are greatly suited for re-commerce programs. And a lot of those, they already have the program. So they're, up and running. And I think as you think about growing that space, it's really tough when that pressure from like regulation perspective is just not there.
Yeah.
But I am Canadian, and coming from Canada, a lot of even the re-commerce programs aren't shipping to Canada, which is like incredibly frustrating because a lot of Canadians also and other countries, they want some of this product, and the U.S. obviously is like, the home of a lot of, these big
popular
massive
products.
warehouses and technologies that enable the re-commerce space. So that's something that I do think there is a demand, and I do think that there's like a gap because there's not, if the consumer wants it, but they don't have it from the brand, they're going to eBay or Marketplace or these other things. And that's really the space that the brand can be capitalizing in, where it's like you're creating a new sales channel and also authenticating your product.
Yep.
And then like what Nate was sharing, like you're potentially gaining 50% new customers for each of those purchases. So, we're passionate about it. We definitely think that there's space for it. And I think just in today's ecosystem of, regulations and whatnot, it's just not a priority for brands, unfortunately.
Yeah, it can be complicated, challenging, right? So, so if it's complicated and challenging for them, I think I know some people that could help them, right? So how do brands like get in touch with you? How do they get started with you? Can you help them like put programs together and get this thing rolling? Yeah,
so that's our Maven Circular brand. So we do consulting. That's really where we started when we jumped into the space of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
We add a flavor that's a little different. We're a married couple, and we have different backgrounds that really blend well together. And basically within Maven Circular, we're building programs, and we're also supporting brands that have existing programs that want to improve upon them. Yeah. So when you think about optimization, when you think about sales channel flow, inventory movement, even things like warehousing and different ways to, there's always an argument in warehousing on like how many warehouses should you have.
Yeah.
When you think about how much your SKU depth is, and the argument between multiple warehouses versus split orders and whatnot. So, we have a lot of data around that specifically for re-commerce as well. So we've helped many brands stand up, and we have supported brands in terms of, RFPs for second time around after being live for, 4 or 5 years, and they're looking at new providers, and, the ecosystem within re-commerce is evolving very quickly, and, who was out 5 years ago, there's 5 new technology companies that have popped up since then. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I think like there's certainly a spectrum of ways that we engage with clients. To Jess's point, there's that kind of full service offering, like help us. Okay, we can do that. We can be a fractional resource, and we often find ourselves in many cases playing that role of like fractional COO to a company, or like fractional head of operations during a transition or improvement project. And then on the other end of that spectrum is like just pure services engagement.
Yeah.
Can you take my returns and can you refulfill them? I'm on Shopify. And the answer is like, yes.
Yeah.
You know,
just to break it down. So there's Maven Circular Consulting, and then there's MFR, which is Maven Fulfillment and Recommerce.
Yeah, so services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the services business.
And so if you're a brand that is in the kind of Shopify, Salesforce, Commerce Cloud ecosystem, and you're using Loop or AfterShip or any of those RMA providers, you can redirect returns to us tomorrow.
Definitely.
And we set this, really like zero integration tech stack. It's 2 boxes up to your RMA provider, it's Ship Hero up to your sales platform, and we can set up a pilot in a week. So that's like the spectrum of like how we engage with clients. Some clients just say, hey, we have a returns problem, can you help us?
Yeah.
Great. We only do deals like that on the services side of the business, and so it's a lot simpler for us to like contract a deal like that because all of our contracts only work one way, and they're like cost plus only.
Yeah.
We don't get into these like, we're not like competing, with rate cards against other 3PL providers. Like, oh, I'll do it for 5 cents cheaper than that guy. Like, that's not how we work.
Yeah.
And the reason why is returns and re-commerce and grading and all of that work is very hard to
standardize.
Yeah, to standardize.
Right.
And you can have a month of returns that are couches, and then the next month they're all lamps, and just the time it takes to repair some of that stuff if we are doing that work just doesn't. And it really creates a flexible environment. So when you're thinking about a brand saying, we want to actually change how product goes out to a consumer, well, then we don't have to sit there and negotiate different rates.
Right.
We're just going to execute the work. It's an open book. They can, open book arrangement. They can visit at any point in time. They can look at our books in terms of labor hours and whatnot. So for us, it's really driving that trust with our customer, with our brands. Which to us, when integrity is definitely one of our top values for our business.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, definitely, and the services you offer sound like they can really capture a lot more value based on what we talked about today. So if people are interested in getting in touch with you, seeing how they can work with you potentially, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, we're obviously on LinkedIn, and then you can go to the website of either one of our businesses, mavencircular.com or Maven FR. So MFR at mavenfr.com.
Right.
We've got contact information out there. And we'd love to chat with folks who are interested in the space.
Definitely, and we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes too. So Nate and Jess, thank you so much for stopping by and joining me here at ProMat.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.